Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Will, Chief Architect of IBM I, and I'm here today with Philippe Magne from ARCAD to give you an overview of a product that we're announcing in conjunction with this IBM I 7.5 release, but it's its own separate product. The product is called Merlin. We're going to talk about it as Merlin. I'll talk a little bit later about what the full name of the product is, but it just makes it easier to talk about the product as the name Merlin. Now, let me describe for you a bit about how it is that we came to the decision that we wanted to create Merlin, the product that it is, and then we'll describe it in a little bit more detail. Of course, there is so much to this product that there are further presentations that are going to be done, particularly at events this year, where we dive into the details. But Philippe and I will give you an overview, why we're doing it and what it is. So let's start with the why. This is a subset of a help systems survey that we work on with help systems every year, where we ask our client base, what are your top concerns? And one of the top concerns is always modernizing applications. Now, if you've been in this industry at all, you understand that that is pretty common. Our clients have a great deal of value built into the software and the data that feeds that software. And they want to take advantage of modern capabilities, but they don't want to lose what they have. So that level of modernization is always a concern of theirs. In fact, it's one of the reasons why ARCAD is in business, to help clients do that. And it is to IBM I's benefit that clients modernize, move forward, because we know our platform is great at helping businesses run their business. Okay, but we also know that if they don't modernize, eventually they won't be able to compete. And so we want to help them. Unfortunately, some clients, while they are trying to use modern tools, get held back by some of the things that are sort of historical in the use of IBM I. When they try to use new tools to do things like DevOps, for example, they have to force fit our file structure, the IBM I file structure, into their development process using those new methodologies. And that can be kind of complicated. That's those clients who, and many of you are probably like that, are moving forward with modern tools and modern methods, but you're finding it difficult and complicated. And then we have a fairly significant part of our client base who would like to modernize, but they feel like they're stuck. They don't have a clear path forward. And that often means that they're using source editors from the 1980s, the green screen kind of editors. They're not using a process that allows them to make changes quickly and so on. And so, of course, this has been going on for a while. What we've tried to do within IBM is to say, for our IBM I clients, this is what we want to help you do. And so for about the last year and a half, we've been talking about a modernization characterization that we're calling IBM I Next Gen Apps. Merlin is a piece of helping solve this problem of getting your applications, your business applications, modernized to the point that they have these 4 attributes. I'll just quickly go over them again. If you've been listening to me talk again for about the last year and a half, you've probably heard me talk about this, but a modern application, if it's a next-gen app, is being developed, maintained, and enhanced in a way that quickly responds to business needs. And that typically means that you have to have some sort of DevOps or CI/CD or agile approach to your development and your deployment of your software. This has never been more true than during the pandemic, when so many businesses had to transition away from at least some personal interaction to none at all. And those clients who had applications that could quickly transform into being able to do things entirely online, they were at an advantage. And those who didn't found it more difficult to run their businesses. So we know that if you're a modern application on IBM I, you will be able to respond to those business needs. And again, that usually means tools and processes that help you do that. The second attribute, encapsulating processes and data, is recognizing that the value that you have in your software and in your data is being able to use it and reuse it and maybe even share it or sell it as a service. Okay, so as you're thinking about modernizing your application, think about the pieces of it that can be reused, pieces of it that can be exposed, pieces of it that might even be part of a bigger business process between your business and your, say, suppliers or partners. The third attribute is blending technology. Don't assume that just one software language is going to be enough for you. Some languages like RPG and SQL are great at doing transactions on IBM I, and you may never need to use any other language than that, or if you've got a history with COBOL, same sort of thing. But if you want to do web services or graphical user interfaces or mobile device enablement, probably you want to use technologies that are best fit for that were created for those purposes. And so a next-gen app is almost always going to be blended. Then you want to realize that there's going to be some software out there that other people have invented. It might be a cloud service. It might be an open source piece of software that you can pull in and use as is without having to rewrite it. So your next-gen app is not only blended in the kind of technology, but in the source of that technology. Because what's important to you as a business application is not that you wrote it, it's that it works for you. Now, if you follow all of these, what you end up with is an application structure where you've got little pieces that can easily be turned into services or API calls. You've got some of the stuff written in one language and some of it written into another, okay? And all of those things interact with the things that make sense for them to interact with. Now, this picture looks very similar to the kind of thing, again, we've been talking about in modernization for a long time, but with those attributes that I talked about earlier, that's the key to what you're trying to end up with. If you have a structure like this, you can be more agile in how you do development because you don't have to change one big or 5 big, huge programs. It can be hundreds of smaller ones that have clear purposes. And when you need to add a new interface or a new service you're talking about, you might be able to reuse something that you have or change it slightly, and you don't have to change everything, okay? All right, well, are people doing this today? Are people trying to get to a modern next-gen app structure? Of course, there are people who are trying to do that. And we have been creating technology for quite some time, and so has the marketplace, right? There's Modern RPG, which helps you to solve the talent gap, right? Modern RPG can be taught to a programmer who's coming out of college these days in just a few weeks because Modern RPG looks like other languages, okay? And there are tools that help you convert old RPG to modern RPG so that those younger people can take advantage of them. Plus, it just makes it easier to manage and maintain on their own. RPG over time has made it much more simple to integrate with some of the modern tools for developing and deploying software, things like Git and Jenkins that are used in a DevOps approach. And we have made it possible for you to create REST APIs around RPG business logic, around SQL, all sorts of things we've added to make it possible for you to do things in a more modern way. And then, of course, there are partner ISV and open source tools that have said, we know there's a real market for this in the IBM I space. And so they have addressed it with pieces of that. We wanted to create a product called Merlin to simplify the path to getting value from that technology and to introduce new technology. Now, in doing so, IBM knew that there was pieces of this that we could develop ourselves, but we also knew that there was a really good partner in the industry, ARCAD, who had some of this stuff already. And so very early on in the development of the concept of this, we contacted ARCAD because they have been a good partner of ours and because they have a lot of the assets that will help us build this product together. So now I'd like to turn it over for a couple minutes to Philippe, who can talk to you a bit about what they do and why they're involved in this product. Philippe?
Thank you, Steve. Yes, the reason why we are here today together with Steve is because we have a longer history of collaboration together. It has started in 2003. You can see, in fact, we have invested a lot in the predecessor of RDI called WDSC. Then IBM proposed us to develop the RPG freeform converter, so it does exist since 2007. And long story short, we are in the passport advantage since 2013 because we made a lot of investment in the integration with rational team concerned, and then after that with urban code. So typically, for people who are using urban code for deploying a IBM I application, they are using the ARCAD piece of it for having a complete integration. And finally, the observer and RPG converter are included in the eConfig channel, which is the platform used by all the hardware BPs throughout the world for the purpose of code understanding and RPG freeform conversion. So all of this to say that was a natural fit to move together in the development of this new product called Merlin. It's a co-development between IBM and ARCAD. Next. Yes, as ARCAD has acquired a long expertise in DevOps, we are investing in this area since now the last 8 years, and we have acquired a very strong experience in multiple different situations, and the value that we bring in the market is probably well, one of the reasons is that we have a very multicultural team in terms of age, in terms of technology background, and it's thanks to the value of this team that we have been capable of reaching a position of worldwide leader in the DevOps for IBM I area. It's what we did so far. In fact, it's in an integration with the most important tools that are, let's say, the flagship tools of the DevOps transformation movement. And there is a good bunch of tools that you can see here around Git, but also Jenkins and Jira. And we are very proud to have the IBM I largest organization as the main reference. I would mention only one because it's the biggest one. It's HSBC. HSBC has been a pioneer in the DevOps transformation. They are live now since 2017, and it's a team of 1,500 developers in different countries, mainly in China and India. Next. So what is the value to embrace the DevOps transformation in the IBM I space? I would say that it has two very strategic angles. One is the transition between generations of developers. Everybody is aware that, in fact, we are getting older and older from time to time, and it's time to have new young generations onboarded for ensuring the future of these critical business applications. And this comes along with the alignment of the legacy system speed of change with the digital world. Of course, I'm not talking about having transfer to production each and every 10 seconds, but at least, in fact, there is a need for an alignment in terms of way of doing things, in terms of also coordinating the different changes in the different platforms. So that's why our slogan is breaking barriers between generations and breaking barriers between technology backgrounds. Next. But yes, DevOps for IBM I has its own specificity. The platform is somewhat specific for multiple reasons, and what we can say is that it's a world that has not a lot changed so far. So that's why, in fact, moving to DevOps standards needs to, this is the natural skills transfer between different team members. So that's the reason why you have to embrace a DevOps transformation first in your digital world. I guess most of you have already done that. And you will see a natural passing of information between the different team members, because it does require a lot of mind shift, and it's all about having the capability to create champions in your team in order to pull the rest of the team members. Security remains the top priority. You've seen in the first slide of Steve that I was on the top priority, so that's the reason why there are some new tools that are required in the change process. And let's not forget that the application of the application architecture of the applications are somewhat specific compared to the distributed world. So therefore, it can't be adapted to industry standard without a certain number of tools, but I will detail that a little bit later on. Next. So at the end, it comes to Merlin. Merlin is here to serve two major waves. One is move to cloud and move to DevOps. And move to DevOps in move to cloud means move to DevOps on cloud. So we are happy to announce you the born of Merlin, which is no more nor less than, click one last time to see what's the definition, full web IDE containerized CI/CD pipeline. This is a very exciting tool that will allow you to consume a DevOps transformation and having in place IDEs very easily, because everything is full web. Next, it's you now.
Thanks, Philippe. Yeah. So as you could tell, what IBM wants for our marketplace and what ARCAD wants for the marketplace, they line up very well. So when we came up with the concept of creating a set of tools for this, we had to decide, okay, how are we going to help clients? As we said, and as Philippe pointed out, it's about modernizing, it's about getting to DevOps, but it's also about moving into the cloud world. There's a whole lot of technology that the cloud world provides. Whether you use it in a public cloud or not, that technology has been sort of built to allow next-gen applications to work with one another, to be combined with one another, and so on. So we said, okay, if we're going to build a set of tools for doing this, the platform we're going to choose for putting those tools out, making them available and running them, is going to be in OpenShift containers. OpenShift Linux containers are being used by industries all around the world to contain new applications that are being used. Now, IBM I is still your core application platform. It's where your data lies. It's the place where you're going to deploy your software. But the tools themselves are going to be running in an OpenShift environment. This is analogous to having development tools that run, say, on a PC, right? There are development tools that run on a PC and they create software or update software and then deploy it onto IBM I. Rather than it being on a PC, a Windows PC, for example, this will be in a set of containers running in a Linux partition, okay? And that means that all of the tools can be put together and used using your browser. There's browser-based technology to be able to do editing. There's browser-based tools to be able to put things into a test and a development environment, etc. Okay, so we had to build a number of different things. First of all, to get ourselves a space to put all of these, we needed to create an OpenShift environment. And then we had to decide which things do we want to deliver with the first release of Merlin. So on the left here, what you see as a box, well, a bunch of white boxes surrounded by a blue box, is the development effort that we went to create this framework into which all of these browser-based applications could be put. Okay, so we've developed that piece of it, and then we identified the first sort of three big things that anybody who wants to do modernization is going to need to have. DevOps, you might expect, we had to have DevOps componentry there. We had to have an integrated development environment that was customized to helping customers use the languages that are most commonly used on a platform. And of course, the biggest of those is RPG. So we have a browser-based IDE that fits with, is integrated with the DevOps tools in Merlin, okay? And it is customized to be able to do all sorts of powerful things with RPG code and other code, okay? Now, again, we don't have time to get a big demo of all of this for you. I'll show you a couple of quick things, but you'll want to take a further look at this. This is a different way of doing tooling on IBM I, but it is accessible to anybody with a browser. The third aspect of this Merlin first release is the IBM I connections piece. Basically, what that says is we want to make it easy for you to develop and consume services on our platform. Now, we've already had some pieces of this in IWS for creating REST-based services, for example, around ILE software. We wanted that to become a natural part of doing development in this new approach. And so that, again, is part of what Merlin is. So this framework guides and simplifies your transformation, not only of your code from existing code that's maybe monolithic, etc., into something more modern, modular, and services-based, but it also helps you transform your approach and your process. Now, this is the first release of Merlin. We know we need to do some other things. And so that's what the grayed out stuff at the bottom is. But we're going to actually get this in the hands of several people out there before we commit to what we're going to do next. Oh, with the exception of one thing. The second gray thing there is a debugger. We're going to get that out pretty soon. We really wanted to get it out as part of the first release of Merlin. It didn't quite make it, so it's going to make it. You won't have to wait for a second release. We'll find a way to get that out there. But the key is that this is the beginning. We know that there are other kinds of tools that once you start using these for development, you'll want to be able to do things. Security and compliance, we could probably provide some sort of tools that will help you to do some sort of compliance analysis. It's not on the list here, but most of our clients who have to manage software also have to manage PTFs for that software, whether it's IBM I PTFs or PTFs that people in application land have created for their products. So there are things we can do, but as I said, we're going to get it into the hands of a few people, maybe a bunch of people, and then start taking requirements. So what we have built, if you look again at that left-hand side, the blue box, I can't tell you how long that little blue box thing has survived. We've been doing this project now, actually faster than any other big project we've ever done. It's been about 18 months from conception to announcement. Okay, but we've carried that blue box from the very moment that we started describing to our executives what we wanted to build. The pretty version of that is now this box that's on the left-hand side here of what the Merlin modernization engine is. It has those components in the yellow box, the IDE and the CI/CD pieces to it, and we'll talk a little bit more about what each of those is. But as I said, we had to create a whole environment that hung together really well. And because we knew that many of our clients are going to be using Linux tools for the first time and going to be moving into the CI/CD world when they wouldn't necessarily have done that in the past, we said we've got to make this very simple and very integrated. We have to focus it on the IBM I way of doing things so that clients who have staff who are very familiar with IBM I can adopt this Linux stuff and the CI/CD stuff in a natural way. We had to make it simplified. We had to make sure it could run wherever Linux could run. And then they could use it on-prem, that's the lower left part of this, in their own power system if they wanted. Like most of our clients are running IBM I on a box that does not use every resource that's available on that box. They could afford to put a Linux partition on there that could run this. And that may be the way many clients do it. Or perhaps you're going to have your development environment in a separate little machine. It doesn't really matter which way you do it. You're going to have a browser-based interface that looks and fits together very nicely, okay? But to do that, we had to create our own framework for the graphical user interface, an engine that allowed the pieces of of code to talk to one another nicely so that you'd have a seamless environment. The first aspect, the first thing that we focus on is this new IDE, the new IBM I developer environment. Now, it is built for a modern developer, and this is where the transition from traditional old-style green screen programming into a web-based or a browser-based IDE is going to be the most natural. We're also going to run the source repository for this product out of Git. And so there is going to be a set of tooling that will allow you, as you adopt Merlin, to populate a set of Git libraries with the code that used to reside in your libraries and members on IBM I or your IFS on IBM I. And then it will become part of this Git framework that sits behind Merlin, and you don't really have to know the complexities of Git, right? It'll all be managed for you. This will allow us to do things like intelligent build and projects and so on. Now, again, as I said, we couldn't do this in the time frame that we've done it all by ourselves within IBM. And so as we did this, it was not only a multi-company, but a multi-continent development effort. Our IDE was developed as some of it being assets that came from ARCAD and some of it that IBM developed ourselves. And even within IBM, a lot of what we did for the browser-based IDE part of it that we developed came from a similar project that was done for browser-based IBM Z programming. Okay, so we all use this stuff called Shay and Thea that help you to run an environment in your browser that does good IDEs. And then ARCAD had the help that already existed, but they modified it to be able to run in this OpenShift environment to do the Git repository setup and do the dependency-based build and so on. So this is why this partnership really made sense. We had certain things that we knew we could do based on our technologies. They had things that were already in market, and if we could integrate them together, it could all be part of one product. And by the way, I want you to understand, it is all part of this one product. While we're talking to you together as two different companies, when you order this, you're getting all of it, no matter where it was sourced, from IBM or from ARCAD. It's all part of it. Now, DevOps environments that people have been setting up without Merlin tend to be relatively complicated. Okay, so we've got clients out there who have been trying to use things like Jenkins and Bob and so on to build their own DevOps environment. And this has made sense for a lot of companies because that's the kind of environment they're using for the development of software that gets deployed on other platforms. Okay, and they've been, as I mentioned at the very beginning, trying to force fit IBM I into that. Now, the concept behind Merlin was, with the addition of ARCAD into this Merlin product, we could hide all of that complexity for you, and you would have one product that would be driven by the Merlin user interface and supported by IBM. Now, again, it'll be supported by a combination of ARCAD and IBM, but it's all part of that one thing. In order to make this design happen, we had to think about it in terms of the people, the kinds of people who were going to be using this product. Now, the new person in this structure, because we're introducing Linux and OpenShift, is that there's going to have to be somebody who manages the OpenShift environment. And what we're trying to do as we roll this out is to make it fairly easy for people who don't have an OpenShift administrator already in their environment to learn the basic things that you need to learn to be able to install an OpenShift environment and then install Merlin into it. Okay, once you've got that done, again, it's analogous to somebody coming and installing a piece of software on your developer's PC. Only you don't have to install it on everybody's PC. You just have to install it on the platform that's going to run the server, and then everybody points a browser at it. The next people that need to understand how to do things is the Merlin administrator, who makes sure that all of the applications are there and connected to one another. They're set up with the right Git repositories, etc. This person might need to know a little bit about the concepts behind Git and Jenkins and so on, so that they can point things at the right libraries and repositories and so on. But the Merlin administrator won't really need to know anything about Linux or OpenShift. Now, we anticipate in smaller shops, these two people will be combined into one. Somebody's going to learn a bit about how to kick off OpenShift and install it, and then configure Merlin to be able to be used. So that then the developers can just focus on doing their development using these new browser-based interfaces. Okay, so that is what we expect will happen. Again, we know there's going to be some learning that goes on to make sure that you know how to install this stuff in a Linux partition or a set of Linux partitions, depending on how it all flows. Okay, but then beyond that, it's all going to be very browser-based and easy to understand. Once you do that, there are pieces of this that are used to do the core CI/CD stuff that come directly from IBM, and then there are pieces of it, again, that come from ARCAD because they specialize in this. So we will have the ability to deploy things without a Jenkins server so that you can use your own Jenkins server if you're already doing that, or out of the box, we will set up a Jenkins server for you and plug in the ARCAD pieces as we describe them. Now, again, you'll want to hear more detailed descriptions, see demos of how all of this works, but we just don't have time for that today. As an overview, I want you to understand that out of the box, you can connect directly to something you've already been using, or you can deploy it and have Merlin deploy it for you. Similarly to what I said about the IDE, there are pieces of this that were developed by our IBM I team, and then pieces of it that came from ARCAD. We've had so there's a part of our team in China that did a lot of the framework stuff that we have, plus a lot of the CI/CD stuff. We have folks both in Rochester and Toronto who did work on the IDE. And then, of course, we have the ARCAD folks who themselves are very geographically dispersed. So this is a worldwide project where pieces of it have come from various places, but now it's all integrated. I stands for integration, so we integrated this for you to make it simpler. So now let me turn it back over to Philippe to talk a bit about how some of this stuff works and what pieces are there.
Okay, yeah, I will start again with something that I insist almost every day on, is the fact that people have to convert their RPG code into freeform. It's absolutely mandatory because, in fact, the syntax of the RPG freeform is very close to .NET and Java. So therefore, in fact, there is no bad reaction from my young developers. They do consider this code as readable. As soon as it's readable, then they can maintain it. So it's absolutely strategic, and it was mandatory to a certain extent to have this piece being integrated within the Merlin project. Next. So DevOps, what is DevOps? In fact, it's no more nor less than the modernization of the development process in the IBM I space. And it's all about having the conversions of working methods. So that's why, in fact, in terms of tooling, the direction is quite classic. It's all about moving into standard tools. And because it's from this movement that you will have major collaborations between your different development teams. Next. So, as I already said, the IBM I application architectures are specific compared to the distributed world. And what we can say, first of all, is that there is an enormous volume of code which does exist. So that's the reason why it's so important to have at least a little tool set in order to improve the productivity in this critical phase of the code understanding. Another characteristic of IBM I application is that it looks like a spaghetti plate with a lot of different interdependencies between different components. So that's the reason why it's also very important to has specific tools for making intelligent builds. Next. So I'm going to describe the different ingredients of the Merlin recipe. I hope that the dish will be very tasty. And as I said, it's all about embracing standards. For sure, Git is a de facto standard now as soon as it comes to the management of source code. Here we are talking about having a single central source code repository for managing any type of source asset for a company. And as a result, in fact, you will have a single methodology for any type of languages. So it's an enormous value because you have this kind of uniformization of the methodology through the usage, through the adoption of Git. Git is giving a lot of value in the traceability in the change process. There is this notion of pull requests. So as soon as there is a change, then the changes can be shared by the different peers in the development team. And this is what is creating the quality of code changes. So thanks to the fact that Merlin is compatible at Git level, so therefore, in fact, by default, all the different commercial releases of Git can be used in your portfolio, such as GitLab, GitHub, and Bitbucket, and with a special mention of GitLab because there have been a partnership being built since the beginning of the year between IBM and GitLab. So what we do propose there is a full support of Git branching model on the IBM I side. That was a challenge, honestly, because in fact the environments traditionally are a little bit siloed. But since its inception in the ARCAD architecture, we have a decentralized model at the development level. So it means that you can have multiple development teams working in parallel, the one with each other. That's the biggest value of Git, because at the end, things will be centralized again for, of course, automating the deployment into production. Next. So Merlin is composed of another major standard of the market, which is VS Code, and in particular, in fact, it's through SHE-FIA. SHE-FIA is no more nor less than the Eclipse distribution of VS Code. You can see here that I did retrieve this survey, but there are many other surveys about the case of VS Code. It is considered as the most popular IDE in the world today. And you can see the first reason is its simplicity, no more nor less than that. So now people are using it because it's very simple, therefore it's very efficient. So it was a natural fit to include SHE-FIA and in the Merlin project. Next. So ARCAD metadata repository, that's an important piece. So we could qualify it as the intelligence of the IBM I applications. Once you install the product, there is a certain number of batch processes that will analyze your existing application in order to store in one single information source the component topology, so where the sources are, where the objects are. This is the information that will be used, of course, for deployment processes. And it does contain all the interdependencies between all those different components. And it's a major point as soon as it comes to the support of ILE environments, because in ILE, you create by default new set of links between your components. ILE is service programs, modules, and so on. And there is natural links being created between those programs, which have to be managed during a change process. And it's exactly the same situation as soon as it comes to SQL components. Triggers on top, triggers have to be removed, then reapplied, and so on and so forth. So it's really thanks to this metadata repository that we are capable of providing the right information for both the code understanding, so any kind of impact analysis activity, but also at the same time having a 100% automation of the build process. The build is not that much easy as you may know. In fact, it looks like an orange. When you see an orange from far, it looks like a perfect sphere, but if you look at the orange very closely, you can see it's full of holes. It's exactly the same for the build process in the IBM I. Next. Jenkins. Why Jenkins in there? It's simply for assembling the different subsequent activity once the code, source code is changed. So once the code is changed, then you have to build the application, and then if the application is properly built, then you can run the next phase, transfer to test and transfer to production. So that's exactly the purpose of Jenkins in this picture. Next. And finally, we arrive, because we are talking about CI/CD. Here is the CD side of CI/CD pipeline. You have everything in there in order to fully automate the transfer from development into different test environments all the way down to the production. And you can see here specific functions that are built in Merlin, such as integrity checks, once again based on this metadata repository, and specific things such as object allocation before deployment, or the management of the target release of the OS, which is a very common case. I have in mind the example of clients deploying data files in different libraries. This has to be managed, of course. And the security side of things is ensured mainly by this automatic rollback capability. So therefore, in fact, the people from operations can run this process during the night, and in case of a problem, they could get back to the previous state of the application. So it's of a great value in terms of automation. Next. So Merlin, what it is no more nor less than the capability to very easily onboard new young developers from anywhere at any time, simply by its underneath architecture. It's a full web-based environment, so that therefore you can plug and play like that on the fly. So it's really what will answer the main issue of skill depletion, because you can think about having developers from everywhere and whenever you want. That's a major promise of Merlin. Next.
Great. So before we wrap this up, I do want to talk a bit about how all of this gets created as its own individual package. And that's this graphical user interface that's implemented again as a browser-based graphical user interface, but the engine underneath it that allows all of these components to talk together nicely. Now, you, generally speaking, won't have to see that, but in order for us to do it, we had to fit it into how we deploy, in fact, how you even acquire container-based applications from IBM. And so there is a place called the Operator Hub out there where you will be able to download Merlin, purchase and download Merlin, and then you'll be able to deploy it. And once you have, we have all of these pieces underneath it making a full-fledged project and product. Okay, we've got the ability to manage the users that are associated with it, monitor what they're doing, make sure that they have authority to do everything that they're doing, everything you'd expect from an integrated IBM I product, only now being done by a set of containers that are driving the IDE, the CI/CD, and everything else that might come into the future. So we have a way of managing the life cycle of the product itself. And that, by the way, includes where you might deploy this. Okay, you could deploy this, for example, in a Power Virtual Server. For those of you who don't recognize that term immediately, IBM in IBM's cloud has a set of Power Virtual Servers that run IBM I, and a set of Power Virtual Servers that run Linux. You could deploy this out there in that cloud and point your browser to it and use it from there if you want to. Or you can put it in your own infrastructure running on a Power Virtual Power VC platform in your own environment. Again, running on Power, maybe on the same physical system you're running IBM I on, or maybe not. And you can do all of that. It doesn't really matter. The CI/CD and the IDE can work from anywhere. So whatever your current state of moving into a hybrid cloud infrastructure, a fully cloud infrastructure, or staying completely on-prem, you can do all of this from or with Merlin. That allows you, as I mentioned earlier on, to make it easy for you to create REST services from what you have today. You've created ILE modules, for example, and we make it easy for you so that you don't have to do all of this all at once, okay? But you can pick the pieces that are necessary, and when you're done, you go ahead and make services out of them. Now, we realize that there are a lot of players, there's a lot of technology that's addressed modernization. We really feel like our place, Merlin's place in the IBM I market, is helping to focus folks on the kinds of things that need to move forward and making it simpler for them to adopt these modern tools and processes while helping them transform the code that they have and the processes that they have from things that came from the 80s and 90s into today's modern world. To do that, we wanted to make it simple, and that's why we created Merlin, a wizard of wizards that simplifies things. It also, by the way, makes IBM I a key player when IBM goes and talks to the marketplace about how its acquisition partnership with Red Hat OpenShift is going to help the future, because these tools will run in that environment. Okay. Now, we didn't do this all by ourselves. Obviously, we partnered with ARCAD. That's part of this. But we also have kept up to date as we've been doing this project with customer advisory councils, both in Common in North America, Common in Europe, and as our large users group, to be able to show them through time what we were coming up with and then taking advice from them. We also have collaborated with some of the key players in the IBM I modernization business. So hopefully, in addition to ARCAD, who will be our primary partner here, there will be some other consultants and so on who will know how to help you set this up in the first place. Now, I promised I would talk about the name. And so before we're done, I do want to talk a little bit about that so that you understand how we got where we got. We wanted this to be a wizard of wizards. Right? We wanted it to be a simple process that made it almost look like magic as you move forward. Now, of course, you do have to do some work. We may be overselling here. It's not entirely magic, but if we're going to have a wizard of wizards, what should we call this product? Well, internally, we started calling it Merlin because in legend, Merlin is kind of the wizard of all wizards. So we started calling it that, and we tried to get that as the name of the product. We wanted to call it IBM I Merlin, and that's it. But there are actually rules about how you name products within IBM. You can't just have IBM I Merlin as the product name. So we tried to think, okay, how could we describe what we've got in a way that might suggest Merlin? And the first part of that is, well, what is Merlin and what's it about? It's about modernizing. And we said it's got a bunch of different complicated pieces that all fit together to help you move forward. Another word for something like that is engine. So it's a modernization engine, right? It helps you move forward, helps you move into a modern environment. And what are we helping clients transform? Well, the life cycle of their software development, right? You're moving from a waterfall approach into a DevOps CI/CD approach. We're modernizing the life cycle. And what do we do as a platform better than anyone else? We make that stuff all integrated. And so we came up with the title. If you go look at what the product name is officially when we announce, now that we've announced the product, you'll see it's IBM I, Modernization Engine for Lifecycle Integration. But we're going to call it Merlin. We expect you're going to call it Merlin. So In fact, when you see the screens that are part of the product, you'll see Merlin a lot. So that's where the name came from. We really appreciate you listening to this today. We're excited about this product. There is so much more that you can learn about it. There are going to be demos, there are going to be videos. I do encourage everyone who's listening to this to find a way to get to one of the conferences where our technical specialists will be talking about the details of this and how it fits. Clearly, it has to fit into and use the things that you've been using, but we have designed it with that in mind. We are confident that you're going to like the way this helps you get into the IBM I Next Gen Apps mindset, and the result will be improved performance of your employees, improved productivity for your business, and a much simpler way of moving forward than you had before Merlin. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.